It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Nico Hines is world editor of said publication. Thanks for joining us from London. How are you?
I'm well. Good evening.
Good evening to Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time magazine. How's business?
Really good.
Really good. Is it really good for Sarah Daniel, staff writer and columnist at French news weekly magazine L'Obs?
It's okay.
It's okay. Just okay. All right.
Yes.
More on that in a moment. Dave Clark is news editor at the French news agency AFP. Thanks for being with us from Brussels. How are things in the Belgian capital?
Oh, it's lovely here. It's lovely here. It's lots of sunshine. Everyone on the terraces.
Are you sure you're in Brussels now?
Yeah, and it's very odd.
Okay.
It's very odd.
The World This Week, where you can listen as well on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. First, he went to Moscow, where UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres tried and failed to negotiate humanitarian corridors, or at least it hasn't materialized so far in southern Ukraine. Then, while Guterres was spending the night, then he went to Kyiv, where he got a dressing down from his hosts over the UN's role. He did visit Bucha and Irpin, the site of those massacres that took place. And then, while he was spending the night in the Ukrainian capital, came this shelling of a residential building.
This says a lot about Russia's true attitude to global institutions, about the efforts of the Russian leadership to humiliate the UN and everything the organization represents.
Vivian Walt, our correspondent in Kyiv, pointing to, on the one side of the street, there was a missile factory. We don't know whether it's in use or not. On the other side of the street, this apartment block. Your thoughts on this happening, again, while Guterres was in town?
You know, obviously there seems to be a strategy which is somewhat effective of keeping people on tenterhooks. You never know if Kyiv is going to be struck or not. For weeks, it wasn't. It began to feel like a normal city. Everybody was talking about the cafes filling up and, you know, the patisseries reopening. And suddenly there's a missile strike. And clearly, aside from the randomness of the timing or the targets, it also appears that very randomness is a tactic of itself.
Do we read too much into this? Oh, it's because Guterres is in town?
I don't know if we read too much, but it's a sign anyway, because the new Guterres was there, and it's not, you know, they didn't take it into consideration. And it's true what Vivian says, that I was there, you know, a few weeks ago, and it's amazing how life is going back very rapidly in those cities, and Kyiv was just resuming its normal way of life, and Russia has to remind that at any point, at any moment, they can strike again. And, you know, it's also, of course, a strategy for the troops, the Ukrainian troops, not to desert this area.
Dave Clark, you were in Kyiv as well when it hunkered down in those early days of the war.
Yes, things seem to have been changing a lot there since I was there. I arrived about a week before the war broke out, was just getting to know the city. And then when it started, everything shut down completely. Obviously, in the first few days of the war, we didn't really know what was going to happen. The Russians obviously planned to take Kyiv quite early. Helicopters arrived on the northern side of the city. There was an attempt to encircle it on two sides. There were infiltrators who got into brief exchanges of fire inside the city itself. And then the Ukrainians pushed them back from the assault on Kyiv, and now we're entering what the Russians themselves are calling a second phase of the war, with these seemingly random attacks on Kyiv and on the west of the country, and then an attempt to encircle the Ukrainian defenders on the frontier with the breakaway republics in the east.
Yeah, we can call up a map that shows that Russia's offensive is continuing. While fighting takes place all along the Eastern Front this Friday, say Ukrainian authorities, and you can see when you look at that map that there have been piecemeal gains over the last week. A lot of claims from one side or the other regarding casualties and advances. And still, you can see at the bottom of your screen there, Mariupol, where there's still those fighters holding out. Nico Hines, the diplomatic shuttle we saw from the UN Secretary General, part of it was about Mariupol and trying to finally secure a humanitarian corridor.
Yeah, and with typical UN flourish, nothing has happened at all so far. I mean, to be fair to him, perhaps something will emerge over the coming days. I don't imagine it was coincidence that a missile struck Kyiv while he was there. Putin loves these kind of metaphors, these symbolic moves, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if he sanctioned that missile to be launched as a reminder to the UN that he's got no respect. I mean, poor Gutierrez, he was being given an ear bashing by Zelensky and then actual missiles landing as well. So he has not had a very fruitful trip, but perhaps it's a good reminder that the UN needs to do a lot more.
UN needs to do a lot more. Of course, the man himself pushing back against UN bashing from both sides during this visit. Let's listen.
Let me be very clear. The Security Council failed to do everything in its power to prevent and end this war. And this is a source of great disappointment, frustration, and anger. But the men and women of the United Nations are working every day for the people of Ukraine, side by side with so many brave Ukrainian organizations.
Now, he works for the 190 plus nations, Nico Hines, that are members of the United Nations. But you get the sense there when he's criticizing the UN Security Council that it is a dig at Russia.
Yeah, of course, you've got this ridiculous position where the United Nations, which is supposed to be safeguarding our peace since the end of the Second World War, has basically infiltrators on the Security Council in the place of, Russia, China, who stop the UN being able to do anything. And those 190 countries have got to figure out a way to make this a usable body. The UN is supposedly, and should be, a great institution. You go to the headquarters there on the east side of New York, and it's kind of inspiring, and the flags are there, and it should be possible for it to be a more useful organisation, and they have to figure out some sort of way to have a Security Council that can actually do something. And if that means kicking out certain countries, then that's what they've got to do. If this is an open and shut case of an unprovoked war on a neighbouring sovereign nation, if that doesn't justify you being kicked out of the Security Council, I don't know what does.
Dave Clark?
Well, yes, but this is a long-standing problem with the UN. And of course, it's not just Russia and China that veto things. Other countries on the Security Council, other permanent members have vetoed things over the years. I'm not sure it's in anybody who's currently on the Security Council's interest to move away from that system. They all have interests to defend. But clearly, when it is a permanent member of the Security Council which has launched the unprovoked attack this time, it does underline, as Nico says, the essential uselessness of the body when it at a political level when it comes to this kind of conflict. Now, alongside that, as Gutierrez has said, there are UN aid agencies and UN legal bodies and so forth that are doing hard work in their corners, but the leadership of the organisation, the Security Council, is just not a useful, not fit for purpose in this kind of situation.
It's now been more than 2 months since the first night of the war when we saw Volodymyr Zelensky posting that video to Facebook, introducing his inner circle, saying to the Russians, look, we're all here. Turns out there's a backstory. In its cover story, Time magazine reporting on a Russian commando's attempt to storm the presidential palace on the first night. Reporter Simon Schuster describing accounts of how automatic firearms were handed out to everyone, including Zelensky. Only a few of them knew how to handle the weapons. One was a veteran of the military intelligence service. He's quoted as saying it was an absolute madhouse, automatics for everyone. Russian troops, he said, made 2 attempts to storm the compound. Zelensky later told me that his wife and children were still there at the time. Vivian Walt.
This is an incredible article, and Simon had basically embedded inside the presidential compound for something like 2 weeks. He knows Zelensky pretty well from previous trips. He speaks Russian, and really got to know what it was like. He says what he wanted to do was to see the war through their eyes, experience what it was like to live this war from inside the presidential compound. What's so revealing about the story, as you mentioned, was that here is a group of characters, many of whom came out of like showbiz. They were theater people, artists, bloggers. They weren't politicians.
And he sees the transformation in real time.
Absolutely. They were, they had to basically become wartime leaders overnight. They hadn't handled weapons before. They hadn't ever lived like this before. They had to be separated from their families, obviously. And 2 months on, obviously the strain has really shown. But on the other hand, he also sort of captures those moments of incredible humanity, this community inside the presidential compound who are cracking jokes, and Zelensky slipped out one day to go get borscht from somebody who was selling borscht on the street, and just this completely surreal situation, and of course also not knowing if every day might be their last.
Right. And earlier this month, Sarah Daniel, you reported from Borodyanka, that's northwest of Kyiv, and how fighters there basically stopped the Russians from taking the capital.
Yes, it was very obvious that if they were not to be there, Kiev would have faced serious problems. And at some point, some people told me that the dead bodies of the Russians were already in full, ceremony outfits and uniforms. So they were really expecting to be in Kiev in the next 3 days. And so this fight that was going on in Vorondianka, but also in Irpin and Bucha, was that who prevented the fight really going into Kyiv, yes.
Did you think back then that we'd see this parade of world leaders now going to the places that you mentioned?
Yeah, it was expected because it was so shocking. I've been covering wars for 20 years, and it was the first time I didn't cover Rwanda, but it was the first time I saw so many dead bodies and exactions, and it was awful. So I expect people going and paying tribute to what happened there, but
more than in places like Iraq.
Oh yeah, much more, because it was a scale like it was. Yeah, they didn't have the time to withdraw the bodies, so we were just in the streets, meeting corpses everywhere.
And so we've seen this reaction, this big response from the international community on Thursday, the same day that Germany's parliament overwhelmingly approved sending heavy weaponry to Ukraine. That's a first. The U.S. president also upping the ante, asking Congress to approve a $33 billion package, 2/3 military spending of it for Kyiv.
The cost of this fight is not cheap. But caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen. We either back Ukrainian people as they defend their country, or we stand by as the Russians continue their atrocities and aggression in Ukraine.
Yeah, the cost. Nico Heinz on the Thursday, lawmakers squarely behind them. On the Friday, those same lawmakers on Capitol Hill arguing about what to do about the highest inflation in 40 years. And the two don't necessarily connect the dots between the two.
Well, look, I think in cases like this, it's obvious that to spend some money now up front will hopefully bring an end to this conflict and therefore future economic stability. So I think it makes sense to invest now and try and bring an end to this conflict as quickly as possible. We had a very interesting interview with a Ukrainian deputy minister this week, Gerashenko, who was saying that the level of support and investment from the US had been laughable so far, and that if the US had backed the European allies during World War II to the same levels, then Hitler would have swept across Europe. And I think we are now seeing the US and Britain and other allies, hey, even the Germans getting involved, stepping up to a new level. And I think that is going to change the balance of this conflict.
And when the UK Foreign Secretary talks about sending planes to Ukraine, what's your reaction?
Yeah, it potentially is another escalation. I think if you look at the details of what they're actually proposing, Britain is talking about backfilling Eastern European nations with British jets to make up for jets that are sent from other nations nearer to Ukraine. So, say Poland sends some MiG fighters to Ukraine, then Britain will send some more equipment to Poland to make up for that. And obviously some of the stuff that is used in Britain has different skills required, so there's training, and it's a kind of slightly longer term process. I think one of the big problems that we're having at the moment with equipping Ukraine is that we've kind of run out of the old school Soviet-style equipment that the Ukrainians are used to, and we're now having to figure out new ways to equip them either with newer equipment, which we then need to train them on, or to manufacture more of the old-style munitions, weapons, heavy weaponry, even tanks that they're used to using.
Yeah, addressing the lawmakers in his hometown of St. Petersburg, we kind of got the rebuttal on Wednesday from Russia's president, again repeating a nuclear-sized veiled threat.
If someone intervenes in events from the outside, this will create strategic threats that are unacceptable for us. They should know that our response to counterstrikes will be immediate and quick.
Dave Clark, where you're sitting in Brussels, what's been the reaction? A shrug? Are they worried? Are they scared?
The NATO people that I've been talking to don't see any evidence that they're preparing any kind of nuclear strike. And obviously, ever since the Cold War, there's been a logic of mutually assured destruction should NATO go directly into a strategic conflict with Russia. The concern at the moment is still with conventional arms. Obviously, as we were saying, that a lot of arms are being shipped out there now. The Russians should probably have taken some time to regroup after their initial mauling, but instead have had to press on very quickly with their campaign in the Donbass, because they need to make some progress before these weapons that Europe and the United States is now sending in are in the hands of the frontline units and properly deployed. Obviously, it's a hodgepodge because we've been racing to get these things together. The Germans are now supplying heavier weapons, but remember the Gepard tanks that they're sending are an air defense system. And these are the kind of weapons that will help the Ukrainians hold off the Russian advance. But they're going to need main battle tanks and probably more jets if they're going to recapture the ground that the Russians have already taken from them. So there's also a transition in the types of weaponry that they'll require if they're going to go on. And then if Russia intends to win this, they're going to have to find some way of cutting off the weapon supplies, which would imply more strikes in the west of the country against railway infrastructure and road infrastructure. As I was leaving Ukraine a number of weeks ago now, but 3 weeks into the conflict, there was a long queue of olive green trucks without any number plates on them, brand new Italian Iveco trucks that was coming over the border, transporting, I assume, ammunition, and I assume that there are very similar convoys going on day after day from the transport hubs, essentially in Poland.
So expect the bombing to go across the country. Sarah Daniel, you agree?
Across the country, I don't know. I think now it's really focused on the Donbass area. But going back to the nuclear threat, I'm not so sure we can be as rational as yeah, of course, it should be avoided. But you see how Putin has reacted along all this war, and he can also be brought to some irrational movements. You see now the false flag attack on Transnistria.
It's a false flag attack, you're sure?
Well, I would assume yes, because yeah, and so you have all these temptations of going on Kiev, on Transnistria, maybe on some other part of the country, just to keep everybody alert, and it can really go very wrong. Beside that, I think, of course, and he has said so, the strategy of Shoigu and all those Russian military strategists is going to be focused on Donbass and the Azov Sea.
On the east of the country. Now, global thermonuclear war can be hazardous for your health. So can be a Russian oligarch, the son of the deputy chair of Gazprom Novatek, insisting that no, Sergei Protozhenia did not butcher his wife and teenage daughter before committing suicide in their vacation villa on Spain's Costa Brava. He is the sixth oligarch to die in suspicious circumstances in recent months. Vivian Walt, what do you make of it?
And I believe all of them since the war began.
Just one before.
One before. I mean, it does seem very suspicious. There is no provable foul play at this point, but this is fairly classic kind of strategy, classic methodology, if you like, under Putin. He has several times targeted for assassination his enemies, and the pressures, on the other hand, the pressures that these oligarchs are under are enormous. It's not beyond the realm of, possibilities that they are suicides. So I don't know what to make of it.
What do you make of it, Nico Hines?
Well, I think we should take it as a good sign. I don't believe in coincidences. So as far as I'm concerned, most of these are probably assassinations by people in the FSB. I don't know whether it would have been directly on the orders of the Kremlin. I think any time Putin is bumping off, these are not outspoken critics. These are generally people who have been part of the inner circle. And I think that question that we asked at the very beginning of the conflict was always, could the oligarchs somehow talk Putin down? Would the threat to their wealth that this war might bring on, would that kind of get them to try and pull him back from the brink? And obviously they failed to do that. I think if we can take the evidence of these people being bumped off, that suggests that Putin's worried, that he's trying to get control again of the influential people within Moscow, and it suggests that there are whispers and rumours of people who potentially might try and stop Putin. So I would take it as good news, not obviously for the families, and these are the risks that you take if you decide to become an oligarch in Russia.
Yeah, and again, they're in the hydrocarbons sector. One day after Vladimir Putin this week shut the tap on natural gas exports to Poland and Bulgaria, we saw the reaction from the other side. The Bulgarian Prime Minister going to those suburbs that Sarah Daniel was mentioning of Kyiv, where atrocities were committed, to Bucha, to Irpin, to offer and telling his hosts that they've got access via his country to the sea, and also telling the rest of the EU that the wartime economy is here, whether we like it or not, and not just for Ukraine, but for all of the EU.
We were never planning to be without Russian gas just a few months back. But now we have an alternative choices, and we're starting to develop an alternative strategy. If we're able to do it, everybody in Europe should be able to do it.
How strong is the resolve here, Sarah Daniel, when you see the prices rising for staple items, when you see the price at the pump, when you see home heating bills that have been so high?
I think the closest to Russia, the highest the resolve is, like in Poland, in Bulgaria, the costs are going to be very high, but they're really willing to stand against Putin. So it will be a different, of course, situation when we approach Western part, like Germany is going to be the really huge tests, because now they have complied to our European resolution rules, but I think we might face in the future some problems, and it's not going to be that easy.
Dave Clark, how about where you are? Russia and Ukraine together combine for 80% of the world's export of oil. I'm not talking about crude oil, I'm talking about sunflower oil. And you're in the land of the fries, of the chips. What's the feeling when it comes to, well, the price of chips going up?
Well, the secret to the Belgian chip is there's quite a lot of beef tallow used in the recipe. So hopefully we can get through this conflict without a chip shortage. I imagine we'll end up with Indonesian palm oil, which will also pose problems for the environment. There's been, in Brussels, on an EU level, it's been a very unedifying spectacle this week of the EU nations essentially trying to get round their own sanctions and finding excuses to keep pouring money into Putin's war machine. Obviously, Bulgaria and Poland took a stance and refused to join Putin's scheme to be paid in rubles, and they got cut off. But Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia, they've concluded that, and with the backing, it turns out, of the European Commission, that this scheme does not fall foul of the sanctions that have already been put in place, and they will be continuing to buy gas directly from Gazprom.
But can you blame them when they're that dependent on Russian oil, Russian gas, particular?
Well, I can blame them for becoming dependent in the first place. I mean, it's not like Putin suddenly became a bad man yesterday. This is a policy that the German governments and Austrian governments have been pursuing for a while, and I think it's widely seen as a mistake. But just as a reporter who's just come back from Ukraine and being here in Brussels, it's been really unedifying was the word I used before. I think I'll stick with that. There's a lot of langue de bois, as you say in Paris, and talking about the details of financing procedures as if Putin cares how he gets his money. It's a disgrace, frankly.
Vivian Wald?
I mean, yes. No one ever accused the EU of being a unified body. There are, fractures on every issue, and this is no different.
I mean, oil and gas revenue is up, yes, for Russia, partly because the price is skyrocketed.
Absolutely.
But the sales in terms of quantity are going down.
But I think that the price increase might actually compensate for that.
More than compensate?
More than compensate for that. And plus, of course, the Western oil companies who might be pulling out of Russia nonetheless are also benefiting from the increase in the per barrel price on world markets. So you have a lot of cross-cutting issues and cross-cutting interests in the West. Yes, of course, everybody's desperate to see the end to this war, but each country is calculating the domestic price they're going to have to pay.
Which is preposterous, of course, after, witnessing the Bucha
Okay,
atrocities.
let me give you an example, Sarah Daniel, because it's not just sunflower oil. Higher energy prices driving up the price of everything from petrol to pet food, like at this store in the suburbs of Paris.
I mostly buy when there are offers on in larger quantities, otherwise it's expensive. But when you love your pet, you don't keep count.
I'll go without other things if I have to, but I haven't changed their habits. They say it's not good for them, especially cats.
Dog and cat owners are feeling the pinch. Again, if you're just back from Ukraine the way you are.
If you love your pet like they do in Ukraine, you cook something for them. You don't have to buy this, made-up food. No, but I mean, we are. I guess my colleague and I are under the shock of what we saw, and of course, having said that Germany, was building on purpose this interest relationship with Russia. How long are we going to wait? You see those murders and of the oligarchs, even if they are not murders, they kill themselves out of tremendous fear. So and then you have all these atrocities committed. Like Putin is really a tyrant. So we have really to find a way together to address this tyrant.
All right. There was the question of the war in Ukraine. There's the question of inflation. It all went out the window for a few hours in France last Sunday night. That's when Emmanuel Macron took time to celebrate re-election at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. He convincingly beat the far-right's Marine Le Pen by 58 to 42% in a rematch of the 2017 election. But the celebration was circumspect and short on the night. And the first French president to win re-election in 2 decades has since returned to the campaign trail ahead of June's legislative elections. These are images from Macron this Friday in the Pyrenees Mountains village of Barbazon-de-Bas. That's before a detour to visit his grandmother's gravesite. Vivian Walt, what a strange re-election. It's, I wouldn't say a non-event, but it's almost like onwards now to the legislatives. What is it? Or is it a big deal?
Sunday evening was very strange. I was, at the celebration at the foot of the Eiffel Tower. It began as a big kind of disco party. Everybody was in a wonderful mood. And then Macron showed up to the sounds of Ode to Joy.
The European anthem?
The European Union anthem. It's a classic move for Macron, flanked by children that nobody quite knew who they were or why they were there, and walking in this kind of funereal way. And it was such a downer. And then he hopped up on stage and gave very, very brief remarks. And the remarks...
Which is uncharacteristic for him.
Extremely uncharacteristic of him. And more than that, they were very kind of sober. I guess somebody had told him, don't be arrogant, don't be too celebratory. But he kind of overcompensated. And essentially his message was, I know you didn't vote for me because you like me. You voted for me but to keep Marine Le Pen out, which was true for a number of people. But nonetheless, he did actually pull off pretty big accomplishment on Sunday night.
And Dave Clark, it was a good night for the European Union. Again, that you heard Viv mentioning, it was the EU anthem to which Macron returned for that speech, for that victory speech. You also had elections in Slovenia, where Eurosceptics were kicked out. Is it a big deal where you are, or is it also kind of an understated event? As here we're waiting for legislative elections, which is why probably.
I think the reaction wouldn't have been understated if Marine Le Pen had won. It was relief rather than celebration. The European Union has already got problems with populist nationalism in many parts of the continent, and they would have been dismayed by Marine Le Pen victory. Probably the end of the European Union as we know it. Everybody here treats every crisis as existential because it's the only way they can mobilize people to get anything done. But that would have maybe deserved that title.
What kind of a campaign is it now going to be for the legislative elections, Sarah Daniel?
But of course, the Ukrainian crisis stole totally the campaign, and there was no campaign whatsoever. But then after, I think I understand why he was so low-key in those remarks, because now he's it's going to be hell for him. He knows it. Everybody is going to go after him. You have also, of course, those legislative elections, but you have also all these people claiming to be named prime minister, and it's the same people like Mélenchon who thinks now he ought to be prime minister.
This is the leader of the left bloc.
The leader of the left, and also he's fighting against the institutions. Like you have this strange, thinking that Macron didn't win this election, so you have to reshuffle the institution. But still, all those people want to be, because it's not only Mélenchon. It's all those people are entitled to become prime minister. So I think socially, the pension question, a lot of problems are going to emerge very soon.
All right, beyond these domestic matters, Nico Hines, seen from the other side of the channel, you who lives in the first-past-the-post system of electing governments, your thoughts on the spectacle that is French elections?
Well, we're used to this kind of first-past-the-post system where nothing is truly representative. We don't have a proportional representation for our parliament, so the system gets skewed between in each thing, and so someone like the Green Party doesn't get any members of Parliament usually, because we have this only in each borough the first person gets the seat. So we're used to that kind of skewing, and of course in France it's applies for the presidential race where you have this head-to-head, and I think it's very obvious why Macron was so sober. Well, firstly, we kind of knew what the result was going to be beforehand, right? So it wasn't like there was a big shock on the night. So I think that explains some of the lack of partying. But also, it's a very sober situation. If you look historically over what Le Pen's done over the last 3 elections now, she started on what was about 18% in 2012, and then 33% in 2017, and now 42% in the most recent election. And that's a very alarming trend if you track it. There's a reason that people should be sober and concerned that 42% of the French electorate are basically voting for a fascist.
A fascist, as you say. She claims not to be. But anyway, just a couple of weeks back, Vivian Walt was wondering aloud in this very studio if Elon Musk was really serious about buying Twitter. Well, Vivian, you got your answer on Monday when the board of the social media giant reversed course and accepted his $44 billion offer. A free speech absolutist, the boss of Tesla and SpaceX, has most notably lashed out in recent days against the platform's cancellation of the New York Post's account when it published an expose on Joe Biden's son Hunter during the 2020 presidential race. And there's a game going on right now on Twitter of trying to figure out what he'll do on day one at the office.
If it's approved, it still needs approval by the majority of shareholders, needs approval by the SEC, Department of Justice. Okay, let's say he really is buying it.
$44 billion we're talking about.
It is an astonishing amount of money. Of course, half of it comes from banks. So, I mean, but nonetheless, it's an astonishing amount of money. He thinks he can make money off this. Twitter, in a sense...
Is this what it's about? Is it about making money, or is it just about having a platform?
I think it's just about... Elon Musk says, why not? I can own this, so why not? It began with him taking a stake in the company and being offered a seat on the board, which he initially kind of accepted and then withdrew because he couldn't own it and be on the board, and then very quickly found a way to buy it. But in a way, Twitter kind of created the situation itself. It's way underperformed what it should be. And I think Elon Musk is probably correct that he can make money off it in a way that it hasn't been until now.
All right. There is this fear, of course, on the left especially, that because he is a free speech absolutist, Sarah Daniel, that it's going to be a return to what Twitter was before it came in for harsh criticism. Your thoughts on this?
Well, from what I heard, Musk said it was not about money, but of course he can say whatever he wants. But and also I think he sold some Tesla shares to
made a profit on it, apparently.
Anyway, yeah, of course it's a concern from, but I think it might be good, you know, all those, because I know some of my friends are always complaining, you know, to be blocked or to, and they don't know why is the reason. And so if it's going to be more transparent, I think it might be good. At least it will be in the open. Otherwise, I don't see if it's going to change a lot, because you have on one hand those very specialized and interesting Twitter account, and on the other hand you have people who insult and you know themselves. But I don't see it changing really. So I don't know. But I like the fact that that the rules might be more open. And he also said that he's going to comply with the laws, the laws from the country. So I don't think it's going to be really a huge change.
You don't think it's going to be a huge change? Well, critics of the former U.S. President Donald Trump, who's blocked from Twitter, like Hollywood actor Robert De Niro, for now they're holding their breath.
Thoughts on Elon Musk buying Twitter?
I hope he does the right thing, period. That's all. He has to do the right thing.
Nico Hines, what's your definition of doing the right thing?
Isn't it? It does strike me, and it's always seemed uncomfortable to me, that you have a democratically elected president of one of the biggest democracies on earth being banned from being allowed to post what he wants on this kind of social networking platform. That always did seem a bit wrong. And I suppose from what Elon Musk has said, that Donald Trump will be allowed back on. I know Trump's saying that he would never go back on there, but I don't believe for a second that he'd be able to resist, especially if he's gearing up for a second presidential run, which I think we should all expect and live in fear of. I mean, I do think that Musk's claim to be a kind of free speech absolutist is complete rubbish. You know, he makes some of the Tesla owners of the cars sign NDAs, and he has half of his cars are made in China, where free speech is absolutely not allowed. So I think to suggest that he's some sort of paragon of free speech is complete nonsense. And I think that the day when Elon Musk's bubble bursts has just come a step closer. This is one of the largest leveraged buyouts in history for a company which has been on the New York Public Stock Exchange for 9 years and has lost money on 7 of those years. This is a guy who's had to sell off a load of his shares from Tesla, which has made him the world's richest man. But he's the owner of a car company that hardly sells any cars and doesn't make any profit from those. I think that the Musk bubble is going to burst soon.
All right, there's a prediction. And, you know, getting back to the point made by Sarah Daniel, the European Commissioner who's in charge of internal markets, taking a serene stance on the matter. Frenchman Thierry Breton tweeting, "Be it cars or social media, any company operating in Europe needs to comply with our rules, regardless of their shareholding. Mr. Musk knows it well. He's familiar with European rules on automotive and will quickly adapt to the Digital Services Act," that new legislation, which this week, Dave Clark, they agreed between the Commission and the European Parliament on the language for that, on the European Council on the language for that. So is Thierry Breton right? We've got nothing to fear?
Well, Elon Musk has said, as Sarah noted, that he'll obey the law. Obviously, it's a global network, though. Is he going to obey the law in every country, or is he going to have one standard based on the US law where he's based on? Obviously, the United States has First Amendment protections, but Elon Musk also, as Nico mentioned, does a lot of business in China. Is he going to apply Chinese law to his new internet toy? The point of the Digital Services Act here in Brussels is that Europe is now big enough to rein in these tech giants, and there's no gianter than Elon Musk right now until his bubble bursts. Twitter is such an odd choice of target, though. I assume someone upset him by by mocking one of his memes, you get that a lot with the people on the right who talk about free speech but don't like to be mocked on the platform, and or don't like to be blocked from the platform in some cases. But it's Web 1.0 Twitter. It's back from the days when we thought that this was going to connect the world and that social networks were going to be a great democratic platform. I was in Egypt for the fall of Mubarak, and people were painting the Facebook and Twitter logos on the walls because they thought they'd been empowered by Silicon Valley to challenge their government. And now they have a renewed military dictatorship in Egypt, and the social networks seem to be spreading more populism, authoritarianism than they are freedom.
All right, whether that bubble will burst.
Nothing good will come of this.
Nothing good will come of this. Oh dear. A damning final word. We've heard about bursting bubbles and nothing good coming of it. Lots of dire predictions. We'll have to have you back to see if they come true. I want to thank Vivian Walt. I want to thank as well I want to thank as well Dave Clark in Brussels, Sarah Daniel, and Nico Hines in London. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.